I'm John Harvey, and the 12th and last of the Resnick novels is called Darkness, Darkness. Real crime, real people, real world. Whenever I'm asked to give writers advice, whether it's about crime writing or writing generally, the one thing I always say is read. Read a lot. Keep reading. Read people who are good. Read people whose work is interesting. Read people who are good stylists. Let all of that seep in. Once you've done the reading, or while you're doing the reading, the next thing after reading a lot is write a lot. Write something every day. It doesn't matter if it's half an hour, half a day if you're lucky. Write something every day. Read it through the next day. Read it aloud. Please read it aloud. Sometimes you can only get the rhythms of the language right if you read it aloud. Something that looks good on the page, read aloud, doesn't necessarily sound right. So it won't necessarily sound right when somebody else reads it. Planning novels is a strange process for me, just as it is probably for most writers. I mean, I've always got some ideas forming maybe 2 or 3 books ahead. Something will occur to you that could make the basis for a story. You'll log it in the back of your mind, you'll make a few notes. Stories are always occurring, and you try and find ways in which they can best be developed. There's a constant process of kind of thought about how the novels might develop, who these characters might be, what might happen. It always seems to me that with writing there are basically 2 kinds of research you do. There's the immediate kind, which is when you're actually working on a specific novel or just before you start, where you know there are things you need the answer to. So then that's when you find those out. You go and talk to people, you Google them, you find out the answers to those things you need because you know you can't actually proceed without that information. The other kind of research is the kind that I think all writers do all the time in their heads. It's the one where they're thinking about ideas, where they're filtering new ideas through their mind while they might be, I don't know, shopping, cooking, taking the dog for a walk, watching Notts County, whatever they might do in their spare time, and just kind of thinking about it in low gear. With Darkness, Darkness, because some of the actual events really happened, the miners' strike was an actual strike, as we know, where the things took place, people who were involved, it's actual history. So I had much less room for manoeuvre in the novel than I often do. So I had to start, therefore, with a fairly specific set of circumstances that I knew I was going to have to work around. So I had to have a much more rigid plan, basic plan to the narrative of the novel than I would often have, because I was tied down by the events. What that didn't stop happening though, and this happens in a number of my novels, is that the identity of the killer, the murderer of the young woman whose body is found at the beginning, did change as the novel progressed. The person who is finally identified as the murderer wasn't necessarily the person I thought it was going to be before I started the book. It wasn't even the person who I thought it was going to be a third of the way through the book. What happens is, when you're writing a novel, characters take on a kind of life of their own. They interact in ways you might not have necessarily suspected beforehand that they would. And therefore, as the book develops, people change. And the ways in which people would behave towards one another also change. So the person you thought before you started the book might make your ideal murderer. By the time you've actually got to know that person, they might not be the ideal murderer at all.